Continuing along part 3 with Unit 6, the Great Depression and the New Deal, we were just talking about the ways that people tried to forget the Great Depression and different ways that they got their ideas off of it. Continuing with that, there was some sense of art, which became known as the American Gothic style, and writers such as John Steinbeck, with his famous book and famous novel called The Grapes of Wrath. This was a book that greatly became famous as it was able to provide a vivid description of the difficulties that individuals were facing during the Great Depression. Um, and just it was ways of novels, radios, watching cartoons and going to theater that people were able to, in a sense, survive the Great Depression and kind of leave the way that they were and take their mind off of that. Um, then in 1933, Prohibition is repealed. This was kind of showing America that times were changing and Congress was moving, American people were moving, and it was becoming of a new era. This became known as the 21st Amendment, which basically repealed the 18th Amendment, which was a prohibiting of the sale of alcohol. As well, right before the Great Depression happened, the plot of land that was scheduled to be for the American Empire, the Empire State Building was finally established and ground was broke. And then eventually, in 1931, it was officially completed. So almost during the Great Depression, we had something that is so symbolic of the world, known as the Empire State Building, that this was actually a staple monument. It was known as the eighth wonder of the world, and it took 1 year and 45 days to complete. The Empire State Building was one of the last skyscrapers to complete it in New York City before the Great Depression hit, and it truly just it was an exciting and huge monument that people were able to nearly symbolize the hope of American people. The cost of construction was about 41 million. At the time, it was the world's tallest building until the Twin Towers were soon developed. And it was a great stapling and a great point that America will get better. There is hope for a future. Ending the era, there was many things that just truly symbolize the Roaring Twenties. They were fading away. Things like organized crime that we talked about the Roaring Twenties. Well, late in early 1930s, Al Capone, he's sent to prison. So one of the greatest of all time organized crime gangsters is sent to prison. Then we have, Calvin Coolidge, one of the second presidents during this time period, eventually dies. And then Babe Ruth, one of the all-time greatest sports heroes of the 20s, retires from baseball. So moving on, you want to kind of wrap up of Hoover, what he was known for. He was convinced that business leaders were going to help maintain the public confidence of the economy, and he was there to protect the domestic industries, and he helped pass the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which at the time period it was the highest import tax rate in history. This is it helped European countries raise their tariffs plus ours, and he was moving us into more of a business industry when truly we were not there yet. He then sets up the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. This gave government credit to the banks, industries, railroads, and interest companies, again, just really targeting the businesses. Again, his theory was that prosperity would start at the top and with the economy as a whole, and Americans, would trickle down to the poor. However, many Americans saw this as that he was only helping the bankers and the big businessmen, while ordinary people were going hungry. So it was kind of like American people looked at him and saw he's helping people who don't need to be helped at this time. He really did not support federal public assistance. He believed that it would destroy people's self-respect and create large bureaucracy. So he thought helping people would almost destroy their ability to fend for themselves. Finally, his kind of last big thing that he's known for was the public opinion. Wasn't very especially was soured after this, but it was whenever he called in the United States Army to disband protests of 20,000 unemployed people after World War One. These veterans who were, protesting in Washington, and he called in the army to call them off. This is known as the Bonus Army. So moving on to the New Deal from 1933 to 1941, this is when a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president. He was elected in 1932. He was a Democrat, but his big election thing was he was promising a new deal for America. This is the plan to end the Depression, and he believed in the 3 R's. First one was relief, then reform, and recovery. FDR's wife is another selling point of his election. Her name was Eleanor. She was experienced social reformer, so that automatically, was promising towards the people that his wife was kind of had his back. She worked for the public housing legislation, which was a state government reform thing that FDR did in New York, which is where he was governor of. She was, all about the bettering of conditions for working women. And she just truly was almost brought in the fact, and she redeveloped the role of the First Lady for the American population. When he first took office, his first 3 months of presidency, they are known as the 100 Days. These were the 100 days that he basically sent in bill after bill to change the way the government was working. These large changes in government policies, powers, and regulation. He was all for the brain trust. First thing he did, he brought in something known as a bank holiday. It was from March 5th through the 9th. This was the stalling of banks to stop people from running to the banks, known as bank runs, to get their money out. This was basically banks were closed and off limits, and this was the time that he used to reevaluate the banking system. He also brought in things known as fireside chats, as I said earlier. This was times where he would come on the CBS radio, as you see in this picture, and almost sit in the homes of the American people and comfort them, tell them things were going to, tell them what was happening in government, tell them, reassure the American public that they were in great hands. During the 100 days, all of his programs and things that he did soon became known as the alphabet soup. These were all the programs that dealt with one of the 3 R's. Here's kind of, if you'll take a moment to kind of jot this down, please. This just goes over a few of his New Deal programs that he instilled. Going a little more detailed on a few of these programs, I want to first bring your attention to the emergency banking relief, the EBRA. This is where banks would prove their financial health, and then they were giving a certificate by the government that said that they could reopen and were good for business. And before they were good for business, Roosevelt instilled something that we still use today, and it is known as the FDIC. This is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is where government insurance on their banking accounts was instilled, and people, because obviously they were scared to put any kind of money back into the banks. Well, with the FDIC, people were more willing and more respected to put their money into the banks, knowing that there was a secure insurance kind of on their money. Another one that he instilled was the Securities of Exchange Commission. This is where the SEC, this is what comes in and regulates the stock market. That was needed during this time period too. Here's a picture of kind of just some of the programs that FDR instilled. This is probably either at a Hooverville or some kind of one of his programs that he would instill, and this is just showing that he cared for the poor, and he was a big believer that almost you had to start from the ground up. A few of the things that were developed throughout the programs that he instilled were monuments such as this, workstations, the monuments, Mount Rushmore. Another thing that he instilled, I want you to take note of, is the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA. This was a program that he instilled to kind of bring some irrigation into the Midwest. This was where they would build dams on the Tennessee River Valley. This allowed for many things, but mainly it allowed for the controlling of flooding that was taking place. It provided electricity for much cheaper rates than people out there could afford, and it created thousands of jobs to allow people the opportunity to get off the unemployment, ratings and start developing and own their own pride of gaining a job again. As well, he instilled something known as the Wagner Act. This is the National Labor Regulation Board. This was a guarantee for workers' rights to unionize, binding together and having this neutral party to make decisions and negotiations about the unemployment or the employment issues, rather than just having a bunch of different unorganized things taking place outside. As well, he started the Fair Labor Standards Act, and this instilled a minimum wage, maximum work hours, and he would ban child labor laws under the age of 16. And these are three things as well that we continue to use today. Going on, just the New Deal Coalition. This was, the whole purpose of FDR was to bring, different groups together as one and kind of unite them. So take note and pause the video and kind of look and evaluate the different groups that are brought together. Moving on, we have the opposition from the right. Obviously, he was a Democrat, and it was not well liked by everyone. The New Deal was not. Conservatives thought that this was bringing in too many regulations. This was hurting business, hurting growth. It was violating the individual's rights, and it was giving the government too much power to kind of say what needs to go. So they really challenged FDR, especially within his re-election of 1936. And then they also continued to reevaluate him in 1940, which basically broke his two-term tradition. After the first deal comes the second New Deal, and this is where we have a few more programs instilled and some that we, again, still see today. One, going into more depth, is the Social Security Act. This was the monthly pension. This is for unemployment issues. This is what we see today, so take note of all these. Pause the video and take note here. Pause the video and take note of the courts and kind of what they instilled as well. I do want to speak quickly on the court packing plan. This was FDR's plan to fix the Supreme Court and kind of allow him to give this executive branch some power and just kind of regulate everything. He tried to pack the court to get most of his bills passed. Going on, let's just quickly discuss the impact of the New Deal. Politically, this was allowing Democrats to become appealing, working class. We were starting to, as in the beginning of the unit, we talked about how the gap of the rich and the poor was so great. Through the New Deal, it was able to start closing that gap and bringing people, jobs and money that they hadn't had in so long. Socially, this was, renewing a sense of hope that America is a safe place for democracy and that government is a good thing and can be a safety net in times of hardship. However, the great thing that people still think about is the last bullet point, and this is that the New Deal, it failed to end the Great Depression in the sense that unemployment was still high. Those without jobs were still so low. But in the end, it was World War II that eventually, finally, gets America to come out of the Great Depression. But nonetheless, the New Deal and FDR, it was a simple sense of compassion that was giving this hope back to the American people that allowed the Great Depression and the New Deal and the Roaring Twenties to almost have this cyclical effect of how things can turn downwardly and then spiral back up. I want you to, this is kind of a little bonus. This is a picture of Ore City in this exact time period that we're talking about. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something on Unit 6. This is the